Hi, everyone, and welcome back to the Leadership Lab. How do you know if you're a leader, if this video is right for you? Well, to know if you have leadership qualities, basically, if your healing, your growth, your education will have an impact on someone else, your team, your culture, your family, your environment, your community. If so, those are the qualities of a leader, and I'm talking to you. In the last episode, we talked about awareness of cognitive distortions. In this episode, we are continuing that conversation with understanding cognitive distortions. Like I said in the last video, go ahead and grab a pen and pencil, and whoever else you think needs to hear this, pause the video, then come on back. For those of you who are here live, welcome. Thank you guys. Don't forget to use the chat if you have questions. I am extremely interactive. So if you have questions, just put something in the chat, raise your hand, say a little something, be like, "Hey, let me ask about that." And I will be more than happy to either answer or say, "Okay, 1 second, once we finish this section, we'll get back to you." We love interaction here. I'm Tiara Click, CEO and founder of When the Mind Clicks, and welcome to the Leadership Lab. All right. So, picking up where we left off, you guys, I have my notes here. Last week, we were talking about awareness of cognitive distortions. This week, we are talking about understanding cognitive distortions. Like I said, we're jumping in with an assessment. Okay. So, I want you to actually do something with this. All right. We're going to go through a quick self assessment. I want you to rate yourself on a scale of 0 to 5. All right. 0 means not at all. I don't experience this. 5 is very frequent. This hits strong. Okay. How much do you relate to this in your day-to-day life? Be honest. This isn't a test, but it is a map. All right. So let me pull up those questions here. All right. We're going to go over a few cognitive distortions, and I want to know where you fall on the rating scale of 0 to 5. First up is mind reading, assuming you know what others are thinking, usually something negative, without real evidence. Rating on a scale of 0 to 5. I create stories in my head about what people must think about me. I interpret neutral behavior, late replies, facial expressions, silence, as rejection or judgment. I assume people are upset with me even when they haven't said anything directly. Next up is catastrophizing. This is turning small problems into worst case scenarios. Rate yourself on a scale of 0 to 5 on these next questions. My mind quickly jumps to the worst possible outcome. Small mistakes feel much bigger than they actually are. When something stressful happens, I spiral into what if thinking. I sometimes take uncertainty as an emergency. The next one is emotional reasoning. So, this is believing something is true because it feels true. I assume something bad must be happening. My emotions strongly influence what I believe about myself or situations. I struggle separating feelings from facts. Next up is overgeneralization. So, this is taking one or just a few experiences and applying it to everything. One bad experience can make me assume future experiences will go the exact same way. I use words like always, never, or every time, especially when I'm upset or dysregulated. Rejection or failure in one area affects how I see myself overall. I sometimes give up quickly after one difficult or bad experience. Next up, we have labeling. So, this is turning mistakes or behaviors into permanent identities. Okay. I call myself negative names when I make a mistake. One bad moment can make me question my entire character. I define myself by my failures more than my growth. I struggle to separate I made a mistake from I am the mistake. Next up is personalization. So, this is taking excessive responsibility for things outside of your control. Rating on a scale of 0 to 5. I blame myself for other people's moods or reactions. When things go wrong, I automatically wonder if it was my fault. I carry responsibility for situations I realistically could not control. I overanalyze whether I upset or disappointed people. All right, next is fortune telling, which is predicting negative outcomes as if they're guaranteed. Okay, you're predicting the future. Usually they're negative. Scale of 0 to 5, I assume things will go badly before they even happen. I avoid opportunities because I already believe they won't work out. I treat my fears like facts about the future. I sometimes quit mentally before I even begin. And the last cognitive distortion we will go over is should statements. So this is using rigid expectations to create pressure, shame, or guilt. Okay, rating on a scale of 0 to 5. I put pressure on myself with thoughts like, I should be further along right now. I struggle to relax because I feel like I always need to be productive. I compare my life to an invisible timeline or a rule book. I feel guilt or shame when I don't meet my own expectations. All right, look at your rating scales. Here's a couple of reflection questions about that. Which cognitive distortion scored the highest for you? Which one do you think developed earliest in your life? Which one impacts your relationships the most? Which one impacts your confidence or your self worth the most? What emotion tends to show up most often underneath these patterns? What would change in your life if this pattern became less powerful? Okay. So, yeah, check in with that self assessment, see how it went. All right. Journal out, write notes, pause the video right now. You guys who are in here, go ahead and journal out. If you want to share, please do. I'll cut it out of the official video, but let's hear some responses. Okay, let's process what came up. I want to ask a few questions. You can drop them into the chat or keep them to yourself or share out loud in the group. Okay, wherever you are. If you guys are watching this video on YouTube and you're in a group with someone, talk amongst yourselves. How does this pattern impact how you see or respond to others? And what does this distortion make you believe about yourself? All right, I want to connect some dots for you right now because distortions don't just live in your thoughts, they shape your emotional experience. That's where understanding comes in. Again, if you didn't watch the first video on awareness, which tells you about most of the cognitive distortions, although we can't get them all because our brains are so fun, and I'm pretty sure there's an endless amount of cognitive distortions. But these distortions shape your emotional experience. And that's what we want to work to understand, right? And your emotional experience, it shapes your behavior. Okay. So take out those journals again. And we are going to do some examples of how your thought, emotions, and behavior are connected. Okay. We're going to walk through the thought that comes up. Okay. And what distortion is it? The emotion you feel because of that thought or that distortion, and the behavior you engage in because of that. So think of a situation, all right? Put the situation at the top in the center of the page, and then put 3 columns: thought slash cognitive distortion, emotion or the feelings that come up, behavior. What do you do? How do you act? All right. So, example, I lost my pencil. That's the situation in the top bubble. The thought, this is so terrible, worst day ever. I'm catastrophizing. That's the thought and the distortion. The emotion, the feeling, anxiety, panic. The behavior, I freeze and I start snapping on people. No one can ask me a question right now. I'm super snappy, super rigid, and the rest of my day, honestly, is highly reactive. All right, here's another example. I didn't pass a test. All right, I thought I was going to get an A and I actually got a D. The thought is, I'm a failure. What am I doing? Labeling. That's the cognitive distortion I'm engaging in. The feeling is shame, maybe even some anger. The behavior, I isolate. I avoid the teacher. I don't show back up to the class. I avoid the person or the event that's connected to that shame, right? Maybe the behavior is I stop studying altogether because I think I'm a failure, right? We'll do one more example. Let's do mind reading. Okay. I'm in the halls and I see a friend who I talked on the phone with this morning, actually, but I see her from across the hall and she doesn't wave at me. My thought, she hates me. Is she mad at me? The cognitive distortion is mind reading. The feeling is insecurity, curiosity, fear, anxiety. The behavior, defensiveness. Fine, if she's going to be like that, then I'm not going to wave to her, right? Think about your highest rated distortion when we did the rating assessment. After that thought happens, what emotion follows? And then what behavior do you engage in? Write it out. Thought, emotion, behavior. Distortions don't just live in your thoughts, they shape your emotional experience and your behavioral patterns. When you see the full chain of events, you understand why changing your thinking isn't just about mindset, it changes everything downstream. We're going to continue exploring understanding in this episode and in this session, specifically understanding ourselves. A lot of the work we do here focuses on awareness, awareness of our emotions, awareness of our behaviors, awareness of our triggers, awareness of relationships. But awareness alone can sometimes leave us feeling confused or even frustrated, right? That's just the first part. The second part is understanding. The third part is a solution. All right. We are focused on understanding in this session. Understanding is what helps us to connect the dots. Understanding helps us ask questions like, why do I react this way? Where did this pattern start? What was this behavior trying to do for me? The goal is not to judge yourself or shame yourself for past behaviors. The goal is just to translate them. We are getting a vantage point and understanding, oh, that's how the system operates. Many of the behaviors we struggle with today were once solutions. At one point in your life, they may have actually helped you to cope, helped you to regulate, helped you to survive something difficult, helped you to feel safer, or helped you to avoid something awful or painful. Understanding those patterns, those thinking patterns, and other behavioral patterns, honestly, help us move from reacting automatically to responding intentionally. All right. So we're going to focus on why I do what I do. One of the first questions I want to explore. Our behavior, our thinking patterns rarely appear randomly. They usually answer a question that the nervous system is trying to solve. Okay. Some behaviors try to reduce anxiety, right? You think catastrophizing is helpful because if I stay ready, then nothing can scare me, nothing can throw me off. Because if I stay ready, then nothing can throw me off. I'll be prepared for everything. So you catastrophize and you think that it's reducing your anxiety, but actually it's dysregulating for your nervous system and it doesn't allow you to be present in the moment or get really intimate with the moment. Some experiences, thoughts, or behaviors try to create a sense of control. Okay. Mind reading tries to create a sense of control. Some cognitive distortions help you to avoid pain, right? Or at least we think. Some of them help people to feel accepted or connected, and some of them are to help us numb out and disconnect completely. Thinking about cognitive distortions and how they connect is important. So, think about a cognitive distortion, a thinking pattern that has caused challenges in your life. Instead of asking, what's wrong with me for thinking this way? We can ask a different question. What was that thought pattern trying to do for me? What feeling was it trying to manage? Was it trying to reduce fear? Was it trying to protect you from rejection? Was it trying to create safety? Was it trying to distract you from some painful experience? What was I trying to protect? What was I trying to feel? What was I trying to avoid? Understanding the function of these patterns is important because it shifts the conversation from blame to insight. All right, we're going to do another exercise. This is for reflection. I want you to pick one distortion, the one that scored the highest for you, or one you're curious about, or maybe your second or third highest. Okay, let's go a little deeper with it. Choose one cognitive distortion you want to understand and reflect on these questions. What does this thinking pattern do for me on a nervous system level? Does it bring relief, distraction, control, numbness, safety, or avoidance? When was the first time I remember using this thinking pattern? What was your age? What was the context of the situation? Was it your home environment? Was it school, a social group? When did this start? When do I notice this pattern showing up most often? What emotion was I trying to manage back then? Right? So, when do I notice it shows up most often? Or when did I notice that it showed up most often? How does this pattern help me survive or stay balanced? Yes, even unhealthy patterns were once adaptive. There was probably a reason. Maybe it was just modeled to you. I don't know. But there was probably a reason. But I want you to think about that question now. The next question is, why does this thinking pattern feel safe or familiar now? Think about it. And the last question is, what is this pattern trying to communicate? I'm scared. I need help. I don't trust myself. I don't want to feel this again. All right. Oftentimes, the nervous system learns patterns very early, not because we are weak, but because our brains are adaptive. The brain's primary job is survival. Sometimes those patterns were learned through modeling. Okay. Sometimes they came through messaging. All right. And sometimes they came through experiences. If they came through modeling, you probably watched how the people around you handled emotions, handled stress. You saw the way they thought about the world, the way they viewed other people, the way they viewed themselves. If it came through messaging, then things were told to you. Sometimes you were told something about yourself, about your emotions, about how we should behave. And if it came through experiences, well, maybe there was something that happened and the nervous system created a strategy to avoid that feeling from happening again. When we map out these patterns, we begin to see how experiences create emotional imprints. An emotional imprint is when the nervous system stores repeated experiences and begins to expect the same future. If someone repeatedly experienced criticism, the nervous system may become highly sensitive to rejection. And that's when labeling starts, personalization starts, should statements start. Again, if you didn't watch the first video, all of the cognitive distortions we're talking about in this video are presented in that first video. If someone experienced instability or chaos, the nervous system might become hypervigilant, hyper alert, or even controlling. Catastrophizing, fortune telling, black and white thinking. Okay? If someone experienced emotional neglect, the nervous system may learn to disconnect from their feelings, which leads to minimization and disqualifying the positive. These patterns make sense when we understand the environments in which they were shaped in. All right. So I want you to think about this for a moment. Growing up, what emotional state did you feel most often? And sometimes it's not childhood, you guys. Sometimes it was a past relationship or a job experience that caused some of these behaviors or cognitive distortions. So if it wasn't growing up, think about which situation or setting caused these distortions and just modify the question for that. Okay. So growing up, what emotional state did you feel most often? Was it anxiety, pressure, loneliness, anger, uncertainty? Then ask yourself, because my environment felt like that, I learned to become someone who, maybe someone who stays guarded, maybe someone who takes care of everyone else, maybe someone who avoids conflict, maybe someone who disconnects emotionally. Because of my environment, because it felt that way, I learned to become someone who stays hyper independent. Drop it in the chat, you guys. Anyone, if you guys are comfortable, drop it in the chat. If you're watching the video on YouTube, put something in the comments or keep the journal to yourself. But think about it, okay? Finish this sentence. Because my environment felt like blank, I learned to become someone who blank. You don't have to share it if you're not ready, but write it down, okay? Now let's start understanding your protective parts. But before we do that, I want you to actually reframe the activity that I just had you do. Now I want you to think about the identity that you want to embody. I want to think about the person that you are becoming. All right. So, despite my upbringing, despite being in an environment that did XYZ. I am learning to become someone who blank. Okay. And we can go ahead and throw away that old narrative after we get clear on it. We need a vantage point of our situation, bring some awareness. But after that, I do want you to reframe it. And I want you to more closely align yourself with the new statement that you're creating. Okay. So, going back to understanding our protective parts, many people carry what we can think of as protective parts of themselves. These parts developed at different moments in life to help us manage difficult experiences. Some people have a protector part that becomes defensive quickly, mind reading, blaming. And if we're talking about survival mode, that's fight mode. Some have an avoider part that shuts down when emotions feel overwhelming, that switches the conversation when it gets uncomfortable, that doesn't want to talk about these things. That's minimization or disqualifying the positive. And if we're talking about survival mode, that's a flight response. Some have that achiever part that tries to stay perfect to avoid criticism. That's when you fall into should statements or all or nothing thinking. And some people have that people pleasing part that tries to keep everyone happy to prevent conflict, even at the detriment of their own well being, their own needs. And that leads to personalization and heaven's reward fallacy. And if we're talking about survival mode, that leads to fawn response. Okay. These parts are not enemies, they are strategies that we learned, but sometimes those strategies continue to operate long after the original situation has passed. Okay. So when does this part of me show up? Think about that. What is it trying to protect me from? And what does that part of me actually need right now? A lot of times, these parts need safety, reassurance, boundaries, or new coping skills, new ways to regulate. As adults, we have something we didn't always have earlier in life: more choices. Okay, one of the most important shifts in growth is recognizing the difference between then and now. Then we may not have had emotional tools. Then we may not have had supportive environments. Then we may not have understood our nervous system. Now we have opportunities to learn new skills. Now we practice regulation, ask for help, and make different choices. That shift does not mean change is easy. Sometimes growth involves what we call a healthy discomfort. Okay. Healthy discomfort is different from harm. I'm not telling you to go re traumatize yourself, but it happens when we step outside of familiar patterns in order to build new ones. Challenging a distorted thought might feel uncomfortable. Sitting with uncertainty instead of catastrophizing might feel unfamiliar. Letting a compliment land without dismissing it might feel strange. But discomfort doesn't always mean something's wrong. Sometimes it means the brain is learning. This is neuroplasticity, okay? The brain's ability to create new pathways through repeated practice. When we challenge an old narrative, we're not just changing our thoughts, we are strengthening those new neural pathways. All right. So, this is where reframing becomes powerful. Your old narrative might say something is wrong with me. A reframed narrative would say my nervous system learned a strategy that made sense at the time, and now I'm learning a new or healthier one. Instead of saying something is wrong with me, I might say, oh, that felt a little off. What's going on? Now I want to start figuring out how to not feel this way. If your old narrative is, I always think the worst, reframe it and tell yourself, my brain developed a protection pattern and I'm learning to build a new one. I'm open to building a new one. If you tell yourself, I can't stop doing this, so concrete, right? Like you've just made your life so rigid. I just can't stop doing this. Reframe it. This is a pattern that I've struggled with for years. This pattern has a root. Now that I see it, I can work with it. Instead of I always mess things up, I'm becoming someone who learns from my mistakes and then builds better strategies. Positive psychology reminds us that growth is not only about fixing our problems, but it is also about building strengths. Strengths that support change, okay? These include self awareness, You're already here. Curiosity, when you ask the questions. Perseverance, you keep showing up. Honesty with oneself, you did the reflection. Willingness to try again. That's everything. The more I understand myself, the more I can become the version of me who regulates emotions more effectively, communicates more clearly, sees the world through a different lens and not just my narrow perspective of what I was taught or what I learned or what I've experienced. I begin to trust myself more, create healthier relationships. Understanding is powerful because it creates spaces for compassion. Understanding without compassion often leads to shame, and we do not want shame. I mean, shame is just a signal. It's okay to feel it for a second, but when you harbor it, shame loves that. That's a whole nother conversation, but just so you know, shame is like mold. It loves dark and quiet little corners. When you isolate and you don't tell anyone what's going on and you start self-attacking and feeding it, shame is a little monster and it loves it. Okay, so stop it. Just use it as information. Okay. But understanding with compassion leads to healing. All right. So I want to leave you with this. What's one thing you understand about yourself now? About a thinking pattern, about a behavior that you didn't fully recognize before? And how might that understanding help you move differently? How are you going to move forward differently? Drop it in the chat. Let me know, or put it in the comments if you're willing to share. In the next video and session, we will continue the conversation on cognitive distortions and it will be solutions, okay? How to combat, minimize, and reframe cognitive distortions. All right? So I'll see you there.